Yes, Mark has been a longtime co-author of mine. He's a professor at St. Norbert College and a graduate of Marquette University in economics. And several years ago, we were interested in individual attitudes toward trade and immigration policies and U.S. unilateral actions. And so we did empirical research on that and found some interesting conclusions, but we felt we were missing a little bit. And so in the '08 election, it really kind of, or excuse me, the '04 election, it really kind of piqued our interest, the role of religion. There seemed to be a much stronger connection between religion, not only in terms of politics, but also economic policy. And so we wanted to explore that, and indeed we found that there was a significant relationship between individual attitudes toward trade, immigration, and unilateral policy actions and the individual's religion. We felt, however, that we found empirical results, but we're really kind of missing the why question. Why is there that connection? And we really felt that it came down to social capital and social trust. And so if you're going to study social capital or social trust, you read Bob's work. And so we really felt that in the beginning of Bowling Alone, Bob does a very good job of explaining the difference between bonding capital and bridging capital. We felt that difference was really the key that we were seeing in the data. And so that's what we just recently published this year as an article to try to fill that gap a little bit and try to put a little bit more explanation in terms of the empirical results. And so what we find is that as an individual attends religious services more often with more frequency, they tend to be more accepting of other people. And then in questions in terms of their trust of other individuals, they tend to be more trusting. In other words, they tend to be more accepting of other people. And that fills the gap a little bit. They're more willing to trade with other people. They're more willing to accept immigrants into their community and assimilate into the community. So it really helped us fill that gap. And so that was the research that we did on religion and social trust.
The core idea of social capital is so simple that I'm always embarrassed to say it. It is just that social connections have value. The more connections we make with other people, the more advantages we get. For example, social connections, social capital is very valuable for getting a job. That is, there's a return to the individual person who has the connections. But social capital, social networks also have externalities. They have effects on bystanders too, so that, for example, if you live in a neighborhood with a high frequency of connection among other people in the neighborhood, that is, people know one another's first name, for example, that has a tendency of deterring crime. It's a very well-established pattern that the best predictor of a low crime rate in a neighborhood is how many neighbors know one another's first name. And that's true even for those neighbors who are not themselves going to the picnics and barbecues and sledding parties. They benefit from the generalized trust and reciprocity. The core idea of social capital is the idea of reciprocity and trust. I'll do this for you now without expecting something back immediately from you, because down the road you'll do something for me, or Joe will do something for me and you'll do something for him, and anyhow we'll all see each other at choir practice on Thursday. That is, I think Yogi Berra was the person who best explained social capital when he said, if you don't go to someone's funeral, they won't come to yours. It's kind of a deep thought. It is that the more connected we are with one another, the more we can count on them and they can count on us. So to go to Joe's finding, really interesting finding about how the more people attend church, the more they're likely to trust other people, I think that's because in that connection at church, they're learning about the process of reciprocity. And you know, the golden rule is another statement of reciprocity. I'll do this for you. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. And if you're in that kind of a community, it's kind of more natural to expect the best of other people and therefore to be more open about immigrants or free trade or whatever. Now, I think, as Joe said, there's another kind of social capital that isn't quite so healthy, and that's social capital in which you only connect with other people who are just like you. That's called bonding social capital, as distinct from this bridging social capital we've been talking about. And probably we, at some point, we'll want to talk a little bit more about the dark side of social capital, in which you don't necessarily trust everybody, you just trust people who are like yourself. But I think, and our work too on religion, the work that we've just done on the role of religion in America, called American Grace, is completely consistent with this part of this finding.
What I talked about so far is how much a person attends a religious service. And so in American Grace, Bob kind of points out that it's how much religion is important rather than what religion. They're both important, but more so how much religion. What we found is that there is a difference across religions, and so we use this idea of bridging and bonding social capital to explain that. And so the idea is that if you have an enclave community, very tight, very close-knit community, you build social capital, but it's that inward social capital where we're really doing and supporting and helping ourselves. From that aspect, it's very good. But if it's all inward, it means we have a lower trust for people outside of our group. And that's the negative for the dark side. And so some people have related that, for example, to prejudice. I trust someone who, as Bob said, is just like me. So looks the same, comes from the same place. And we have a really tight bond, and we really trust each other, and we have each other's back. But anyone who doesn't look like me, they're excluded. So the dark side is this being, excluding other groups that are not part of that enclave community. And so what we found is that that's important because which religion it is can have an impact, as some will build more bridging capital and less bonding, and others more bonding capital and less bridging. And so we did see a difference in attitudes across religious groups toward immigrants, trade with others, and so on.
Right. This is one of these cases in which you're more confident you're onto the truth because two independent research teams, Joe's team and my team, working completely independently, actually ended up at exactly the same point in the argument. I think I agree totally. I mean, our work agrees totally with this. More religion, that is, in general, connecting with other people, for example, at church, does produce this bridging social capital and the outward trust and the more tolerant attitudes toward immigrants and trade and so on. That's exactly right. But there are some forms of religion which are really privilege or emphasize the sort of inward, it's my way, our way, or the highway, basically, kind of attitude. In our work, we see this tied to particular theological perspectives on life, and a theological perspective which emphasizes the uniqueness and the difference between my religion, which is the true religion, and other people's religion, is associated, exactly as Joe said, with more bonding social capital. It's great if you're inside that community, but with less bridging and less outwardly focused. And of course, sometimes, in some cases, those two factors, how much you go to church, how much religion you're involved in, which pushes toward more bridging and more trust, and which kind of religion, the more fundamentalist kind of religion, in the same person, they push in opposite directions. That is, fundamentalists tend to attend church a lot. The going to church part of it probably does increase more bonding, more bridging, more trust, and so on. But the fundamentalist outlook and the inward part works in the other direction. So these are both at play, but where you see the biggest outward-looking trust and attitudes and so on, exactly as Joe says, is people who attend church a lot but are affiliated with churches which are a little more open and less closed. Well, religion is an important feature of American life, and we were wanting to know. We aim to provide the most comprehensive and most in-depth discussion of the role of religion in American social and political life in the last half century. And there's many ways in which religion contributes to American democracy. On the other hand, you don't have to look very far around the world to discover, or into world history to discover, that religion taken in high doses can be toxic for getting along and for democracy and so on. So you think of Beirut or Baghdad or Bombay or Belfast, all these places that are very religious and very diverse have high rates of mayhem. The United States is going through a period of great polarization, so part of the book is about the polarization part of that. That's how religion divides this part. But we also discovered that underneath that, there's actually a great deal of religious tolerance in America, and so that's the religion unites us. So we're not trying here to say religion good or religion bad. We're trying to understand in a kind of a two-handed way, not on the one hand and on the other hand. We're trying to understand in a two-handed way how religion contributes to or doesn't contribute to American democracy. Now I can tell you more about what the history of division and uniting over the last 50 years is. It's a really interesting story.
What I've taken away from the book so far, first, Bob does a wonderful job of assimilating a lot of empirical evidence and putting it together in a way that everyone can look at the information, understand the trends that he's trying to illustrate. He does a wonderful job of that. His co-author does an equally superb job in his book, A Matter of Faith, on religion and politics. And so they assimilate vast amount of survey data in a way that's very accessible. In Bowling Alone, what I took from Bowling Alone was Bob had been pointing out that there was, in general, a decline in religious participation, especially among youth. And so that's one trend that I continue to see in American Grace. And so that has important consequences for social capital, as Bob has just been talking about. And so that's one thing that I'm still very interested in, and I still find troubling in the reading that we have in American Grace. I think, however, the combination of Putnam and Campbell, what really strikes me is this relationship between politics and religion. And what really captured my attention is that what I got out of the book is that what's driving people more so today is their political belief, and they're kind of shaping or bending their religion to fit more closely their political belief.
We were shocked at that, actually. Look, over the last 50 years, there's been an increasing polarization of religion and politics in America. More people are either really deeply religious or pretty deeply secular in America, and there are fewer people in the kind of middle. And moreover, those two extremes are more associated with politics than they used to be. It used to be there were plenty of liberal Democrats in the pews on Sunday morning and plenty of unchurched conservatives. But now, mostly the people who are in church are conservative Republicans, and mostly the people who are not in church are liberal Democrats. And so obviously there's been people sorting themselves out. I could not believe that people would be altering their religious views to fit their politics, because I thought, religion is about your eternal fate, so people are not likely to put at risk their eternal fate over how they feel about George W. Bush or Bill Clinton or whatever. But actually, in the data, we can see people adjusting their religious views and their religious participation according to their political views. So the underlying driver here has been this political polarization that we're all familiar with in our time. And it's linked to religion. It's become more closely linked to religion. And that in itself should have tends to produce greater religious tension in America. And in fact, we have a great deal of religious tolerance in America. So one of the puzzles here is, in the face of this political polarization that we're talking about, that is linked to religion, how could it be that we nevertheless actually all seem reasonably tolerant of one another's religious views? That's one of the core questions of the book.